They didn't bring candles. They brought paperwork. On my 75th birthday, Emily slid a silver envelope across the white tablecloth at Magnolia House and said, "Happy Freedom, Dad." Inside was a glossy brochure, Maple Grove Retirement Living. The cover smiled at me with staged azaleas and a promise of peace. My name was already printed on the intake form. Preferred move-in date, January 15th. A yellow sticky note in Emily's square handwriting. This is best. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and tell us where you're listening from. The violinist in the corner played something gentle. The waiter refilled my glass. I kept my hand flat on the brochure so they wouldn't see it tremble. Peter lifted his Bordeaux like a coach calling time out. "You did it all, Dad. 40 years. It's time to let us handle the rest." He spoke like he talks to clients. Soft voice, hard edges. A clipped stapled to the packet caught the candlelight. $5,000 reservation deposit line highlighted. Someone had already circled it in blue ink. Charleston, late November. A Saturday night that smelled like cinnamon and river air. Outside the windows, the oaks along King Street dragged their shadows like slow brushes across the brick. Inside, my children arranged my future with the efficiency of a corporate off-site. Emily tapped the page titled Belongings and Disposal. "We did the checklist," she said. "Downsizing is healthy." Her smile didn't touch her eyes. I turned one page. Authorized family representative had 2 neat signatures. Emily Whitmore, Peter Whitmore. There was a pre-printed spot for mine. Empty. My fork scraped porcelain. That sound felt louder than the room. I looked at the date printed at the bottom. November 23rd, today. "What happens to the house?" I asked, quiet. My voice sounded like it had walked a long way to find me. Peter dabbed his mouth with a napkin. "Market's hot. We've had early interest. January closing would be ideal." He pushed a business card across the butter plate as if it were nothing. "Delaney and Carber Realty, exclusive listing consultation." On the back, in his quick slanted handwriting, "As is condition." Clean title, "Cash buyer likely." I built that house with my hands in 1986. Every beam, every window angle, every line of sight to the river was a problem solved and a promise made. When your mother died, I told myself the house would keep me standing. That was my retirement plan, planks and memories. A mortgage stamped paid the day I turned 68. I kept that stamp in my desk drawer like a medal. Emily reached for my wrist. "Please don't be stubborn." Her bracelet chimed softly. "Maple Grove has a craft studio, a river walk, chef's nights." She had copied phrases straight from the brochure. I could hear the bulleted list in her cadence. There's a kind of silence a family learns together. The silence that says, "Don't make this harder." I let it sit between the bread plates until the waiter brought dessert. A slice of chocolate torte with a thin gold disc that said 75, like a trophy for surviving. I slid the brochure back into its envelope. "Thank you," I said. 2 words as neat as their signatures. Peter relaxed. Emily exhaled. The violinist finished his song. What I didn't say, I could see the margins where they'd already planned my absence. The way Peter's eyes kept drifting to his phone when it buzzed under the table. The way Emily's tote bag had the corner of a manila file peeking out. I caught the label as she tucked it deeper. Intake. Jack Whitmore. When the check came, Peter reached for it with a son's flourish and a broker's speed. "Let me, Dad." He placed his black card, then pulled it back a second too slow, like he wanted the room to notice. I noticed something else. The way his thumb pressed a small crease into the silver envelope he slid back to me. A mark. Ownership. We said goodnight under the archway, where the jasmine grows in spring. The air had that crisp, brittle edge Charleston gets when the boat's halyards ping like loose metronomes on the harbor. Emily kissed my cheek and whispered, "You'll love Maple Grove." Peter clapped my shoulder. I'll start the paperwork Monday. I tucked the envelope under my arm. The paper felt heavier than it should. Not a gift. A verdict. I watched their taillights disappear down King Street. Then I walked, slow and careful, to the car I still drive myself. The leather was cool against my back. I set the brochure on the passenger seat and turned the key. On the inside flap, a small, second sticky note I hadn't seen before. POA to review next week. Power of attorney. A date in Emily's tidy numbers. Nov 27, 4 days. I drove home on Meeting Street with the window cracked for air. The river was black and flat. When I parked, I carried the envelope straight to my desk. I opened the bottom drawer and placed it beside the mortgage stamp and your mother's favorite fountain pen. I clicked the desk lamp off. If I spoke then, the words would have been loud and foolish, so I didn't. I let the house hold me up, the way it always has, and I listened to the old wood answer the night. Tomorrow, I would count what was still mine. And I would start with my name. I didn't sleep that night. The brochure lay open on the nightstand like a threat disguised in pastel colors. The smiling seniors on the cover looked nothing like me. I stared at the ceiling fans spinning above, each blade whispering the same word over and over. Replaceable. Sunday morning, Charleston woke slow. The harbor mist crawled over the street. The church bells from St. Michael's dragging through the air like they, too, were tired of pretending. I made coffee. The smell should have comforted me. It didn't. I opened the silver envelope again, studied the line. Move-in date confirmed. Deposit processed. My throat went dry. I checked my phone. 17 unread emails from Emily. All attachments. All labeled preparation forms. I clicked one. Medical authorization. Third-party care. The signature block already had her initials. Beneath that, mine. Forged. At 9 a.m., I drove to the bank on Broad Street. The marble lobby felt colder than usual. I asked the teller to print my last month's statement. When the paper came sliding through the printer, I felt my stomach drop. 2 withdrawals I didn't recognize, $1,400 and $7,600, both labeled Authorized Family Transfer. I froze the account on the spot. That's when I realized it wasn't just betrayal. It was logistics. My children hadn't turned on me overnight. They had planned this quietly, efficiently, like a merger. Back home, I found an appraisal letter mixed into the junk mail, my son's handwriting on the corner. Appraised value, 2.8 tatters. Accept offer immediately. The paper smelled faintly of his cologne. I sat on the edge of the couch, holding it the way I once held his report cards. My chest hurt. Not from anger, but from the kind of grief that doesn't have a name. Linda, my caretaker, was humming in the kitchen. She'd been with me for 4 years, quiet, polite, steady. When I walked in, she hung up her phone too quickly. "Everything all right?" I asked. Her smile was too wide. "Just my sister," she said. But her phone screen was still lit. The last call logged. Peter, 2:36, Yatminen. I felt something shift inside me then. The same way you feel a house settle in a storm. I didn't confront her, not yet. I simply noted the time. That evening, I sat at my wife's old writing desk and pulled out the folder where I keep her death certificate, the deed, and the paid-off mortgage. Each paper felt like part of our marriage. I stacked them neatly beside the brochure. That's when the lamp flickered. Or maybe I blinked too long. The next morning, I made oatmeal, but couldn't eat. I stared out the kitchen window at the magnolia tree she planted the year our daughter was born. The leaves were turning, brittle and brown. The branches looked like hands trying to reach back in time. By noon, I decided to check my voicemail. One message from Peter. "Dad, we'll come by tomorrow to help you sort your stuff. Don't worry about the bills. We're taking care of everything now. Love you." Everything. That word again. Always sweet when it hides a knife. That night, I poured myself a bourbon and sat in the dark. The hum of the refrigerator, the ticking of the wall clock, the distant horns from the harbor. Everything sounded too loud. When Linda left for the night, I noticed a folded paper near the sink. Not hers, Emily's stationery. The first line stopped me cold. Ensure Dad signs by Tuesday. Under it, deposit cleared. I didn't need to read more. I went to my study, locked the door, and opened the drawer with my wife's pen. I wrote one line on a yellow legal pad. If they want control, let them think they have it. Then I slid it beneath the mortgage stamp. Before I went to bed, I did something I hadn't done in years. I prayed, not for forgiveness, for patience. The kind that waits in silence while the trap builds itself. By morning, I'd already decided this story wasn't going to end in Maple Grove. It was going to end on my terms. They handed me a brochure for a life of quiet. I handed them silence that planned louder. Monday morning, November 26th, I crossed the Cooper River into downtown and climbed the 2 flights to Harold Barnes's office on King Street. Harold's name has lived in my Rolodex longer than any ringtone. Lawyer, friend, man who once helped me settle a zoning fight in '92. He made coffee the way he always does, too strong, poured into a chipped mug that belonged to his mother. He listened before he spoke. Listening is a kind of law. It lets you hear what someone will do next. I kept thinking you might need advice, he said without preamble, eyes soft behind his bifocals. I set the Maple Grove brochure on his mahogany desk like a provocation. He read it once, twice. They started with a deposit, he murmured. You saw the POA note? I put a thin stack of papers between us. The bank printout showing the 2 authorized family transfer. Withdrawals, $1,400 and $7,600, dated November 24th and 25th. The appraisal note in my son's handwriting that marked our house at 2.8 million. The manila envelope Emily had tucked away at the restaurant with the header. Intake, Jack Whitmore. Each paper had a small domestic smell to it, Peter's cologne, Emily's perfume. They felt like evidence, but they also felt like memory. Harold tapped a pen against the margin. We do this by the book, he said. No theatrics. First, revoke any power of attorney they might be using. File a protective order on the account. Second, if you want to protect the house and the money, we can create an irrevocable trust or a charitable vehicle that places your money beyond immediate family access. Third, gather proof. Proof, I repeated. Like what? Like recorded conversations, bank authorizations, a paper trail that shows intent. He slid a small black recorder across the desk. You've still got your voice, Jack. Use it. Over the next 48 hours, we moved like 2 chess players. Harold drafted a trust naming my wife's memory as the linchpin, the Margaret Whitmore Foundation, charitable, focused on elderly dignity, irrevocable in nature, headquartered in Charleston with a board of independent trustees. Harold explained the mechanics without sugar. Funds moved into an irrevocable entity with clear charitable purpose, removed direct family access, legally tidy, public-facing, final. The words felt surgical and beautiful. I called my broker, Elaine, from Broad Street Investments. She's been with me since the SNL scare. I asked her to list the portfolio and outline liquidation timing. There were municipal bonds, a small selection of dividend stocks, and an annuity that matured next month. The numbers added up, just shy of what I wanted. You'll need a quick sale, Elaine warned. On paper, you're set for about 5.2 winters if markets cooperate. I told her to proceed with discretion. Limit order, no headline. The account freeze and the trust wiring would follow Harold's instructions. Transactions that sudden and large draw attention. We wanted method, not fireworks. While legal and financial scaffolding went up, I did something quieter. I hired a private investigator, Marcus Hale, a college acquaintance who'd retired from the marshals and now kept people honest for $200 an hour. I asked Marcus to shadow my children's meetings, to trace a few calls, and to get me anything that proved the brochure was not a loving suggestion but a plan. Marcus delivered in less than a week. 3 meeting logs, 2 photos of Peter at a downtown cafe with a man Harold recognized as a developer, and a voicemail transcription where Peter laughed about the ease of moving Dad. Marcus's invoice came to $200. The evidence was priceless. I also set a small trap at home. I dusted off an old dictaphone I'd used for architectural sketches and left it in the study where Peter likes to sit when he helps. On November 28th, he stopped by under the pretense of measuring for carpet. He forgot the recorder. He didn't forget to talk. I captured him saying, plain as weather, "Once he's at Maple Grove, the house will clear. Contracts will pencil out by January. We don't need to rush." His voice, smug and sure, made me feel like a patient reading the last page of a book nobody had let me finish. Everything we were doing was lawful. Contract filings, trust language, documented meetings. Harold filed the revocation of any pending POA the next morning and an emergency notice at the bank to flag any further withdrawals. He arranged for a temporary hold on online transfers pending verification. The bank's compliance officer, a woman named Renee, called me personally. "We can place a security hold while we confirm authorizations," she said, and I heard relief like rain. At home, I left Linda a different kind of note than the one she expected. Instead of ordering groceries, I wrote, "Be honest. If they offer, tell me. No secrets." She folded the paper twice and slid it into her apron. She began to watch their habits differently. Small things matter. Which cup Peter chooses, whether Emily brings up downsizing in casual conversation. Marcus's photos showed them laughing in a realtor's office with a brochure that matched mine. Harold's draft trust showed how quickly an irrevocable vehicle could shut a door. On the calendar, I circled one date in red. December 15th, the family's annual holiday dinner. Harold raised an eyebrow. "Perfect stage," he said. "They'll expect a surrender. We'll give them a lesson." I nodded and felt something cool and steady in my chest. Revenge, in my mind, was not a blow. It was a correction, measured and public, one that used law and paper to return what honesty had taken. Before I left Harold's office, he folded the trust documents and slid them into a manila folder marked Margaret Foundation, Confidential. He looked at me and said, "When you're ready to reveal, do it where everyone can hear it." I tucked the folder under my arm, felt the weight of paper and possibility, and walked back into the November damp with a plan that smelled faintly of coffee and ink. They taught me how to be invisible. I taught them how to be obvious. December began with small, precise acts. Harold and I moved like 2 men who understood the language of paper. We made noise in the places noise mattered. On Monday, December 2nd, Elaine called with numbers. "We can liquidate the municipal ladder, the dividend tranche, and the annuity payout," she said. "If we run the municipal bonds at par and get the annuity in cash, plus a quiet private sale of the Willoughby print and your wartime map, you'll clear roughly $6 million. I closed my eyes and pictured the inked totals. $200,000 in bonds, $2,100,000 in stocks, one $100,000 annuity, $600,000 from private sales. Numbers that added up to a clean, terrifying sum, $6,000. "We need discretion," Elaine warned. "Large trades trigger alerts." I told her what Harold had already set in motion. The bank hold, the flagged authorizations, the legal revocation. "Proceed," I said. "Limit orders. Stagger the trades across 3 days. No calls to family." On December 3rd, Harold filed the irrevocable trust paperwork with the Charleston County Recorder. The Margaret Whitmore Foundation became a legal person with a mission to fund community-based senior care facilities honoring dignity and service. Irrevocable meant final. The board comprised 2 independent trustees Harold had vetted, a retired judge and an accountant with no family ties, and Harold himself as a non-beneficiary advisor. The trust paperwork bore signatures and the heavy stamp of consequence. I signed with my old fountain pen. The ink dried like a promise. That afternoon, Elaine executed the first tranche. The municipal bonds moved into cash. I watched the bank printout she sent to my secure email, $1,210,000. Sold 12 flowers or 3. Harold set up an escrow account for the incoming wire, with specific instructions, funds to be routed to the foundation, not to any personal account. I told Harold to prepare a wiring template and an independent confirmation protocol so the bank couldn't misdirect anything if someone tried. Marcus, my PI, delivered more than photos. He gave me a list of names who had been in Peter's orbit: developers, brokers, a man who handled estate clearances. Marcus also found a text thread where Peter arranged a consultation at Delaney & Cummered Realty on December 1st, discussing quick sale and as-is. The thread included a dollar amount, 2.8 meters. Evidence stacked like bricks. Every message I placed alongside the bank printouts read like a dam waiting for a single push. On December 4th and 5th, the remaining trades went through with surgical slowness. Stocks sold in measured lots, $295,000. Sold, 1204. The annuity cashed out on the 5th for $108,000. And the private art sale closed with a wire for $587,000 into the escrow. Each transaction produced a receipt Elaine emailed me and Harold with a simple subject line: confidential. Trade receipt. I printed them, numbered each copy, and slipped them into the manila folder marked Margaret Foundation, confidential. That same week, I changed the locks. Not theatrically, not to punish, but to protect. On December 6th, a locksmith named Ramon arrived with new deadbolts and a certificate. Changed locks. 1206. I placed the house key in my safe and gave copies only to Harold and Linda. I left one copy at the bank's safety deposit box under a sealed envelope labeled Trust Access. Emergency. The continuity ledger grew. Money moved, locks changed, receipts stored, everything recorded and everything legal. Linda became my quiet ally. She confessed that Peter had come by on November 30th to help pack and had measured door frames and cabinets, asking about the attic key. When I asked if she'd heard him say anything about the foundation or money, she shook her head and cried, "No, sir, I didn't know." Then she added, "But I did hear Peter on the phone saying, 'We'll have it by January. It's clean.'" Linda signed a written statement for Harold on December 7th. "I heard Peter say, 'We'll have it by January. It's clean.'" Her handwriting trembled on the paper. The paper did not. Between trades, I set the dictaphone recordings aside and listened to them like sermons. Peter's voice, recorded in the study on November 28th, said, "Once he's at Maple Grove, the house will clear." In another clip, a voicemail Marcus recovered had Peter laughing. "We close in January. It's a no-brainer." The voice sounded like someone who'd already counted his inheritance. I burned an audio CD, labeled it, and handed it to Harold. That CD would travel only where the law allowed. By December 8th, the escrow account reflected the transfers. Harold authorized the wire to the Margaret Foundation. The bank's compliance officer, Renee, called to confirm the approvals. She read the list of transfers back to me and ended the call with, "Everything is in order. Mr. Whitmore, the funds will post to the foundation account tomorrow." I felt the word post like a key turning. During those days, I kept living like a man with a calendar. I answered the phone in measured doses. I walked the Magnolia Path in the morning, and I told no one I was planning anything other than the usual. Emily called twice. Peter texted once. "When can we come by? We'll sort the boxes." I replied, "Later. I'm resting." The truth was, I was organizing a reveal. On December 9th, a small delivery arrived, a brass plaque for the Foundation's first grant. I held it in my hands, etched in neat letters, "Dedicated to Dignity, in memory of Margaret Whitmore." The plaque felt heavier than I expected. I kept it on my work table as if to remind myself that revenge wasn't the point. Restoration was. Everything we had done so far, the transfers, the trust, the changed locks, the statements, was legal, deliberate, and irreversible. The papers sat like a courtroom before witnesses. I folded the confidential folder, placed it back into my desk, and wrote the next date on the calendar in red. December 15th. Family dinner. I closed the drawer, the sound sounding like the last bolt on a safe. The plan had muscle now. The next part would be public. The week before the dinner felt like walking a tightrope with a ledger in my pocket. I ticked off days on the kitchen calendar in pencil and watched the pencil marks smudge like small confessions. December 10th came and went. December 11th, too. On the 12th, Harold called with a voice that didn't hide the pleasure of a plan working. "They've noticed the transfers. Expect a reaction." I put the phone down and folded the bank receipts again. $210,000. Sold 12R3, $2,095,000. Sold 12A404, $108,000. Sold 1205, $587,000. Sold 1205. Each one a blunt instrument and a promise. On the morning of December 13th, Emily's assistant emailed a lawyer's letter to Harold. Demand for immediate medical evaluation and temporary conservatorship. The headline was a lance. The content read like a map. They argued in polite legalese that I was deteriorating and therefore in need of third-party oversight. I read the letter twice, then 3 times, circling the parts that called my memory into question. I remembered the details of my wife's wedding, the angle of our bedroom window, the smell of rain before a storm. Memory is not proof to a paper that calls itself urgent, but it is a stubborn thing. Harold smiled when I showed him the demand. "They're playing the predictable game," he said. "It's the theater families perform when they think the script is going against them." He leaned forward and ran a finger under a line of the letter. "They want a hearing. They want to move you. They want you out of the house and out of the way." He closed his eyes for a second, then opened them and said, "Bring them to dinner." I understood then what he meant. If they wanted a hearing, we'd give them a stage. If they wanted to move me quietly, we'd give them the loudest possible proof of the quiet they'd planned. The holiday dinner on December 15th was not simply a family ritual. It was the final exam they had scheduled in their heads. Harold and I decided the twist would be there. Between the 13th and the 15th, the air in the house sharpened. I added a place setting for a guest who would not eat. The brass plaque that read, "Dedicated to Dignity, in memory of Margaret Whitmore." I placed it on the mantel between our wedding photo and the clock that had always told time like a steady, impartial witness. Linda ironed the tablecloth until the creases looked like intent. She taped a name card to the place where my wife used to sit and wrote my name bold. Jack Whitmore. She folded her hands and said, "Sir, please let me know if you want me to speak." I shook my head. Her loyalty felt like a small, bright fuse. On the 14th, I received a curt email from Peter. "We'll be there early to help set up. Also, we've filed for emergency conservatorship to protect Dad's interests." The words were meant to sound noble. They read to me like a confession disguised as protection. He attached, baldly, a copied, filed docket entry. Case number 2025 CV 1128. Petition for temporary conservatorship. Filed. 12/14. The filing timestamp was 3:02 p.m. I kept the document in my pocket like a card someone had dealt too soon. Harold arranged for the retired judge on the U Foundation Board to quietly arrive before dessert. He arranged for Renee, the bank compliance officer, to sit at the end of the table under the pretense of a holiday guest. He arranged for Marcus, the PI, to hand a discreet envelope to the local reporter he'd called. A reporter who had once covered a zoning fight I'd won in the 80s and had never liked being on the wrong side of a story. Harold told me, if they bring the courthouse, bring the courtroom to them. On the afternoon of the 15th, the house smelled of roast and citrus and something deeper, the perfume of consequence. Emily arrived with a designer tote and a lawyer's stare. Peter walked in with armfuls of folding chairs and a phone that buzzed like an accusing insect. They sat across from me like two defendants waiting for the judge to call roll. The family gathered. Uncles, cousins, people who had watched our lives unfold like a slow film. No one guessed the script had been rewritten. At the table, the first course came and went. I watched them watch me. The way Emily's fingers lingered on the napkin was different than before. They trembled with an anxiety that sounded like guilt. Peter's jaw clicked when he chewed. He kept glancing at his watch. Conversation orbited small worlds. Weather, the choir, who had hung the wreath. The banalities were a drumbeat that calmed the room and made it ready for a blow. When the main course arrived, Emily stood under the pretense of clearing a plate and said, loudly enough for the table, "Jack, we filed for conservatorship because we think it's best. You'll be safer in Maple Grove." She tried to make it sound like a mercy. The violinist hit a note like a question in the seam of a dress. I let them speak. I watched Harold on my left, his face a line of steel. I waited until Peter leaned in and, in a voice he thought was private, said, "We'll play it as concern." He smiled at Emily and reached under the table where he kept his phone. At that moment, I stood. I took the small envelope from my jacket pocket, the one with the brass plaques polishing cloth and the recording CD Harold had not yet played in public. I set it on the table where everyone could see it and unfolded the trust documents like a map. "Before we continue," I said, calm and even, "I want everyone to hear something." I signaled to Harold. He flicked a small player on, and the room filled with the unmistakable sound of Peter's voice, recorded in my study on November 28th. "Once he's at Maple Grove, the house will clear. We close in January. It's a no-brainer." The sound was not harsh. It was simple and plain, like rain hitting metal. Conversation stumbled. Emily's face went white as the tablecloth. Peter's hand left the phone. The lawyer at their side reached for his briefcase, searching for the rules that might rewrite the present moment. Renee, the compliance officer, sat very still. The retired judge looked at me with the kind of sorrow that is almost respect. They had filed for conservatorship to stop me. Instead, their own words explained why I had started to move. The petition for conservatorship reads coldly on the docket, but in the room, layman's proof, actual voices, receipts, bank confirmations, closed the distance between a legal claim and a moral claim. Emily tried to interrupt, but Harold laid a hand on his napkin and said, "Let him finish." I reached for the printed receipts and the Linda statement and read them slowly, the way a man reads a will aloud. The evidence stacked itself like bricks. Linda's note, Marcus's photos, the voicemail transcriptions, the confidential trade receipt emails. Each one landed on the table and told the story they'd tried to keep secret. The twist did not come like a sledgehammer. It came like a mirror. They had expected me small and private. They found me prepared and public. The next move would be theirs, and the room shifted into a silence that felt like a courtroom waiting for a verdict. I closed the folder, and in that closing sound felt the hinge of the next act swing open. The public reckoning that would not be decided by backroom calls, but in the light that follows a confession. Dinner began the way every family dinner begins, with politeness, with the noise people make when they want to seem ordinary. By 7:30, the house was full. Laughter, plates, the slow hum of the oven. Outside, Charleston's December air hung cold and sharp over the Cooper River. Inside, the fire cast long orange shadows against the glass cabinets that still smelled faintly of my wife's perfume. Emily was in charge of the seating plan, of course. She placed me at the head of the table as if to flatter me, but I knew the trick. Keep the old man visible and contained. Peter took the seat beside her, tapping through texts while pretending to check the stock market. He'd dressed like a man attending a closing, navy blazer, watch too new. I wore the same gray suit I'd worn to my wife's funeral. The jacket still held the scent of cedar from the closet. In its inner pocket sat the envelope, the trust deed, Linda's written statement, the audio disc, and a single brass plaque. $6 million of consequence folded into paper. Harold arrived quietly, coat collar turned up against the cold. I introduced him as an old friend from work. The retired judge followed 10 minutes later, polite, unassuming. Renee from the bank slipped in last, pretending to be a dinner guest. Nobody noticed her notepad. We said grace. Emily served the roast. Peter poured wine like a host, taking over another man's home. They talked about the future, how the market would turn next quarter, how Maple Grove had private patios. Each phrase slid across the table like a small betrayal. Halfway through the meal, Emily stood and lifted her glass. "Dad," she said, smiling for the audience, "we just want what's best. You've worked hard. It's time to let others take care of you." Her voice softened. "You'll be safe. You'll have people." The room went still enough to hear the clock tick above the mantel. I let her finish. Then I looked at Peter. "You agree?" He raised his glass. "Absolutely. We filed the conservatorship papers yesterday. Just a precaution." He said it like a compliment. I set down my fork. The sound was deliberate, like a gavel on wood. Then you should hear what precaution sounds like on tape. Harold pressed the small recorder. My study filled the room. My own walls, my own air, and then Peter's voice spilled out. "Once he's at Maple Grove, the house will clear. We close in January. It's a no-brainer." No one moved. The only sound was the slow, mechanical breathing of the fire. Peter's face drained to the color of paper. Emily's fork clattered onto her plate. I reached into the envelope and slid a single page across the table. "That," I said, "is the deed of trust for the Margaret Whitmore Foundation. Effective. December 8th, all $6 million of my estate were transferred there. Irrevocably. The foundation owns this house." The bank verified the transfer. "Renee?" Renee lifted her eyes. "Professional, precise. Funds cleared last week," she said. "Irrevocable status confirmed." The retired judge cleared his throat. "A fine instrument. Charitable purpose clearly stated. Legally sound." Emily's lips parted, but no words came. Peter whispered, "You can't do that." I already did. I placed Linda's handwritten note beside his wine glass. "And this is the statement from someone you pressured. You told her, 'We'll have it by January.' It's clean. You built your plan on other people's fear." The table didn't breathe. Somewhere outside, a wind bell chimed against the porch. Harold spoke softly, as if reading minutes. "Mr. Whitmore's capacity has been independently certified by a physician. The conservatorship petition will be dismissed as moot." Peter's lawyer, a man I hadn't invited, rose halfway out of his chair, then sat again. He knew the sound of a case collapsing. I poured myself a small glass of wine. "You wanted me to rest," I said. "Now I can, because you can't touch a cent. Every dollar will build homes for people whose children forgot them." Emily covered her face. Her shoulders shook once, twice, the sound more frustration than sorrow. Peter stared at the floor, his jaw working but finding no purchase in the air. The rest of the guests, the cousins, the aunts, sat frozen in a silence thick with second-hand shame. The roast cooled. The candles bent toward the wax. I lifted the brass plaque from the envelope and placed it at the center of the table. Its engraving caught the firelight, dedicated to dignity. In memory of Margaret Whitmore, this, I said, is where my retirement went. The violinist in the corner, sensing something irretrievable had passed, began to play again. A slow, unsure melody that barely held its notes. Peter pushed back his chair so hard it scraped the floor. "You ruined us." "No," I said. "You ruined the idea of us. I just wrote it down." He left without a coat. Emily followed, her heels clicking down the hall like punctuation marks on a sentence that no longer made sense. The door closed with the finality of a file stamped complete. The guests drifted out one by one. Harold stayed to help me gather the papers. "You sure you're all right?" he asked. I folded the envelope, now empty of secrets, and slid it back into my jacket. "I'm fine. Tonight was the easy part." Outside, the cold smelled clean. The sky hung heavy with stars. I could hear the faint sound of church bells rolling across the harbor, marking the hour like a benediction. Inside, the fire hissed and settled. I poured the last of the wine into Margaret's glass and whispered, "They gave me a retirement brochure. I gave them a foundation." The room felt lighter. Justice often does. The next morning, Charleston woke gray and quiet. I woke lighter. The house smelled of ashes and citrus peel from last night's roast. On the dining table, the candles had burned down to puddles. The brass plaque still sat in the center, catching the weak morning light. I didn't move it. I wanted them to see it again when they came back for explanations, because they always come back for explanations. By 8 o'clock, the world already knew. The reporter Harold had tipped off ran a front-page feature in the Charleston. Ledger, local architect turns family betrayal. Into $6 million foundation for seniors. The subhead read, "Children filed for control of assets. Father responded with charity." The article was balanced, factual, merciless. It quoted the trust documents, included a photo of the dinner table with the plaque in focus, and even referenced verified recordings of estate coercion. The journalist had done her job, and given me closure in print, my phone wouldn't stop ringing. Friends, old clients, even the pastor from St. Michael's. "You did the right thing, Jack," one message said. "Wish I had your courage." But it wasn't courage. It was arithmetic. You subtract dishonor from legacy, and what remains is peace. Peter's brokerage office closed its doors by noon. Clients pulled accounts, the state board opened an ethics review, and one partner went on record saying, "We had no idea he was leveraging family." Holdings. Emily's consulting firm issued a statement about personal matters unrelated to corporate conduct, which is the kind of sentence people write when they're scared. They called that night. First, Peter. His voice was raw, somewhere between apology and rage. "You made us look like thieves." "You made yourself look like one," I said quietly. "I'll fight this," he warned. "I'll challenge the trust." "You can't challenge a gift you never received." He hung up without saying goodbye. An hour later, Emily called. She didn't try to argue. "Dad," she whispered, "why did you have to do it publicly?" "Because you betrayed me privately," I said. "And quiet betrayals need loud endings." For a moment, I thought she might cry. Then she said something soft, something I hadn't heard since she was a child. I didn't mean for it to go this far. I believed her. That was the tragedy. Intent doesn't erase harm. Harold came by the next morning with 2 copies of the ledger. He placed one on my kitchen island and said, "You've become the city's favorite parable." I smiled. "Parables are only useful if people learn from them." He laughed. "They will, eventually." Linda returned to work that afternoon. She looked guilty, until I handed her an envelope with a letter of reference and a bonus check. "You didn't owe me that," she said. "No," I answered, "but you owed yourself forgiveness. Don't let them take that too." Outside, the wind shifted. Charleston winters don't roar. They whisper. The oaks along King Street swayed like an audience that already knew the ending. By the third day, my gate filled with letters. Some were from strangers thanking me for reminding them that age isn't weakness. Others came from adult children who sounded shaken. Each envelope a small confession of guilt. One stood out, a hand-scribbled note from a woman in Beaufort. "My son wanted to sell my house. Now he's volunteering at your foundation. Thank you." That letter I kept on the mantel, next to Margaret's photograph. Harold finalized the trust's first disbursement that week. $1.5 million toward converting an old parish hall into a senior community. We named it the River House. The irony wasn't lost on me, the same word my children used to describe the property they wanted to sell. Meanwhile, Emily went quiet. Peter left town. Rumor said he moved to Atlanta. I didn't chase either of them. I'd spent years believing reconciliation was the same as love. It isn't. Reconciliation is mercy after truth. That Sunday, I walked through the garden, the one my wife had designed in her last spring. The magnolia tree was bare now, its branches reaching upward like open hands. I stopped under it and whispered, "It's done." In the distance, church bells rang noon. I thought of how betrayal echoes, sharp at first, then duller, until it becomes background noise for the rest of your life. But so does justice. You just have to listen long enough. I went back inside, poured coffee, and opened the ledger one last time. The final paragraph quoted me, a line I hadn't realized the reporter caught. They gave me a retirement plan. I gave them a reminder that family isn't management. I folded the paper and smiled. That was enough fame for a lifetime. Justice doesn't always wear a black robe or slam a gavel. Sometimes it wears sunlight. The story reached beyond Charleston. Within a week, the Associated Press picked it up. Reporters called from New York, Atlanta, even London. They wanted the angle. Betrayed father turns inheritance into hope. I didn't say much. Just one sentence, repeated each time. I didn't punish them. I protected what mattered. On December 22nd, 1 week after the dinner, the Margaret Whitmore Foundation formally opened its first project, the River House Senior Community, an old brick parish hall on Beaufort's waterfront, renovated into 20 small apartments with shared gardens and a library. The first residents were 3 widows, 2 veterans, and 1 retired teacher who said, "I used to teach your son." That sentence almost broke me, but I smiled and thanked her. The past has its own gravity. You just learn to walk carefully around it. Harold stood beside me at the ribbon-cutting, crisp winter air biting through our coats. He nodded toward the brass plaque mounted on the entrance wall, built from betrayal, dedicated to dignity. Underneath, smaller letters read, "The Margaret Whitmore Foundation. 2025, Renee from the bank was there too, quietly proud." She handed me a small sealed envelope. The foundation's first dividend check from residual interest, $84,050. "For sustainability," she said. "This is how it keeps growing." I smiled. Growth without greed. That's new for us. A local news camera caught my short speech. I didn't plan it, but the words came easily. When they gave me that retirement brochure, I saw a cage disguised as care. But tonight, this building proves something different. You can't retire dignity. It doesn't expire, and it doesn't need permission to exist. Applause rolled across the courtyard like a slow tide. Even Harold's eyes glimmered behind his glasses. 2 days later, the Charleston County Court dismissed Peter and Emily's petition for conservatorship, without merit and rendered moot. The judge's written opinion quoted from my trust deed. Competence demonstrated through deliberate and lawful estate planning. Those words felt cleaner than forgiveness. By Christmas Eve, both my children had sent letters, identical in tone, different in ink. Emily's was handwritten, 5 pages long. She called herself misguided. She said she missed Mom's calmness, my patience, our old Sunday breakfasts. She wrote, "I was afraid of watching you fade, so I tried to control what I couldn't bear to lose." I believed that part. Fear dresses itself up as practicality all the time. Peter's letter was typed, shorter, defensive. "You made us desperate," he wrote. "We just wanted stability. You blindsided us." He ended it with, "You win. Enjoy the show." I didn't reply to either. Sometimes silence says what justice already decided. The foundation gained donors fast, people who saw themselves in the story. By New Year's, it had over $500,000 in pledges. Harold joked that I'd accidentally started a movement. "You turned betrayal into a brand," he laughed. But it wasn't a brand. It was a confession that helped other people breathe. In early January, I attended a city council meeting where the mayor recognized the Margaret Whitmore Foundation for humanitarian contribution. I stood behind the podium under fluorescent lights and thought of the dinner table, the recorder, the sound of my children's silence. "We build walls to protect our assets," I said. "Maybe it's time we build doors instead." Afterward, an older man approached me, gray hair, workman's hands, watery eyes. "My daughter wants to put me somewhere like Maple Grove," he said. "Can I volunteer here instead?" "Come Monday," I said. "We'll find you a hammer." That moment, that simple promise, felt more like justice than any court document. Every Friday since, I drive to Beaufort to check on the river house. I walk through the hallways and listen to the sound of laughter. Soft, unplanned, ordinary. The kind of sound you only hear where people feel safe. Sometimes I stand under the plaque and trace the words with my thumb. The metal is cool, but the message burns. Built from betrayal. Dedicated to dignity. And each time I whisper to myself, this is the verdict. Because justice, when done right, doesn't end with punishment. It ends with purpose. The house feels different now. Quieter, but not empty. The kind of quiet that hums, like the sea after a storm when you know the waves have done their work. I wake early these days, before the light fully breaks over the river. I make 1 cup of coffee, black, and sit by the window that overlooks the magnolia tree. It's bare this time of year, but I've learned that even trees rest before they bloom again. Maybe people do too. Some mornings, I still expect to hear Emily's laughter echoing from the kitchen, the way it used to when she'd steal extra syrup for her pancakes. Or Peter's hammer clanging against wood when he'd help me patch a railing just to avoid doing homework. Nostalgia is a gentle liar. It reminds you of who they were, not what they became. I keep a stack of letters beside the lamp on my desk. Most are from strangers. Sons and daughters who read the article and saw themselves reflected in one of the roles. The betrayed or the betrayer. One man wrote, "You reminded me that love and control are not the same." Another, "I called my father after 20 years. Every word is proof that the story did something good, even if it came from something broken. Sometimes I think about Emily. I picture her walking to work in that city pace of hers, clutching coffee and regret. I hope she's learning to tell the difference between guilt and growth. Guilt keeps you in the same room. Growth makes you build a new one. Peter, he's harder. His pride runs deep, and pride is the last wall to fall. But walls fall eventually, especially the ones built on money. A week ago, I received a small card with no return address. Inside, 2 words written in Peter's hurried scrawl. "I'm trying." That was enough. I pinned it to the edge of my corkboard beside the trust copy. You can forgive someone without letting them back in. You can love without surrendering your peace. I visit the foundation every Friday still. The drive to Beaufort takes about an hour and a half, but it's a good kind of distance. The kind that lets your thoughts settle between the white lines. The residents there know me by name now. They wave from the porch when I pull up, some in wheelchairs, some standing, all alive with that rare, precious kind of independence. There's an old veteran named Walter who jokes every week. "You're the guy who got rich by giving it away." And I tell him, "I got free by giving it away." We laugh, but it's true. Freedom doesn't always come from keeping what's yours. Sometimes it comes from watching it build something you'll never see finished, but knowing it's in motion. At night, when the house creaks and the wind moves through the shutters, I sometimes hear Margaret's voice. Not words, just presence. She'd always said, "The children will follow your example, Jack." She didn't know how right she was. They followed it, just not the way she meant. And now, maybe, I've given them a new one to follow. I keep that Maple Grove brochure framed in my study. People laugh when they see it. But to me, it's art. A reminder that dignity isn't something people give you. It's something you hold on to when everyone else tells you to let go. When I look at that brochure, I don't see betrayal anymore. I see the moment I remembered who I was. I whisper the same line every night before turning off the lamp. You didn't lose me. You gave me away. The new year came quietly. No fireworks, no champagne, just the slow rhythm of rain on the river and the smell of pine from the wreath still hanging by the door. Charleston never does winter dramatically. It just exhales. I like that. January marked 1 month since the dinner, and yet it already felt like a different lifetime. The noise had faded, the reporters moved on, and the city had gone back to its routines. But the foundation didn't fade. It grew roots. Harold called on January 5th. "You've started something larger than yourself," he said. He sounded proud, but I could tell the work was heavier than either of us expected. Donations had poured in faster than his small team could handle. Volunteers wanted to partner, and local news kept asking for follow-ups. "You've turned decency into a management problem," he joked. A week later, the River House received its second grant, $750,000, from a Charleston business collective that had read the story and wanted to help expand the model statewide. Harold asked if I'd consider sitting on the foundation board formally. "You don't need to be silent anymore," he said. "You're the reason this exists," I hesitated. "Harold, you know what happens when family and power mix." He smiled. "Then keep it pure. You don't have to control it. Just guide it." I agreed, under one condition. Every new project must bear someone's name who earned dignity, not inherited it. He wrote it into the charter that day. Meanwhile, life at home grew simple again. I mowed my own lawn, replaced a light bulb above the porch, fixed a loose shutter. It felt good to do things that had nothing to do with money. Linda stayed on part-time, not as a caretaker anymore, but as a friend. We shared coffee in the mornings, talked about her grandson's college plans, and sometimes sat in silence. The good kind. One afternoon in late January, a package arrived with no sender. Inside was a stack of photos: the magnolia tree, the kitchen, the front porch, each taken from the sidewalk, as if someone had been remembering from a distance. At the bottom was a note written in a familiar hand. "The house looks better than I remembered. I'll stop by someday, if that's still okay." No name, but I didn't need one. I slid the note under the frame of the Maple Grove brochure. I didn't reply, not yet. Some apologies need to age before they're worth opening. On February 2nd, the River House opened its art studio, funded by the second grant. They named it the Whitmore Room and hung my wife's portrait above the doorway. Someone handed me scissors to cut the ribbon, and for a moment, I felt her beside me. I could almost hear her whisper, "You did the right thing." "Jack," I didn't cry, not because I was strong, but because peace doesn't leave room for tears. Later that evening, Harold and I sat on the porch of the facility, watching the sunset sink into the Beaufort River. "You could have taken revenge any number of ways," he said. "Court, scandal, lawsuits. Why this?" I thought about it. "Because punishment ends stories. But this starts new ones." He nodded, quiet for a while. Then he said, "You know, your kids might still come around." "Maybe," I said, "but this time they'll have to knock." We laughed softly, and the sound drifted into the water. When I got home that night, I found a voicemail waiting. Emily's voice, nervous but steady. "Dad, I saw the river house on TV. It's beautiful. Mom would have loved it. I'm proud of you." Then a pause, the sound of someone catching her breath. "I hope you're doing okay." I didn't delete the message. I just saved it. Maybe some things aren't meant to be answered. The brochure on my desk hasn't moved. But the man who first opened it, he has. I kept the Maple Grove brochure framed in my study. People think it's strange that I'd memorialize the very thing that tried to end my freedom. But to me, it's not a reminder of betrayal. It's a symbol of awakening. The paper that once felt like a cage now looks like a certificate of emancipation. It hangs just above my desk, right next to the Foundation's first newspaper clipping. The photo shows me shaking hands with the mayor, smiling under that brass plaque, built from betrayal, dedicated to dignity. Sometimes I catch the reflection of both frames at once, the brochure and the plaque, and they look like before and after shots of the same soul. I've made a habit of writing small notes on yellow paper and pinning them around the frame. They're not quotes or affirmations, just lessons learned the hard way. Trust doesn't die in one moment. It bleeds out, slowly. Money doesn't change people. It unmasks them. And the newest one, written in my wife's old fountain pen, "You didn't lose them. You found yourself." A few days ago, I received a letter from Maple Grove itself. Polite, corporate, painfully cheerful. "Mr. Whitmore, we are expanding our senior programs and would love to include your foundation on our advisory board." I laughed out loud. The kind of laugh that starts deep in your chest and rolls into relief. They wanted advice from the man they once expected to move in quietly and disappear. Life has a sense of humor sharper than any blade. I wrote back a single line. "Thank you for your offer. I've already built my own retirement home." Every night before bed, I walk past that frame, switch off the study lamp, and whisper the same words I whispered the night of the dinner. The words that finished the story better than any revenge ever could. They gave me a retirement plan. I gave them an education. Then I turn out the light, and the reflection of the brass plaque glows faintly in the dark. Proof that dignity, once reclaimed, doesn't need to be loud to last.